Good morning. I invite you this morning to open your Bibles to Deuteronomy, the 17th chapter. Deuteronomy chapter 17. This year, it is my plan to present a series of lessons on the kings of Israel and Judah. They are patterned after a book that's on the bestseller list right now, Confronting the Presidents. And I thought, well, that would be a good thing to do with the kings, wouldn't it? And so this year, that's my plan, and I think that what I want us to see from these lessons is that keeping God's covenant is essential to His relationship with His people. Breaking the covenant can lead to unforeseen consequences that affect the individual and many others, and I would say for years to come. Paul, and the sermon that he preached in Antioch of Pisidia to a Jewish audience, said that he knew that the people ask for a king. And you know what? That was not a surprise to God. In Deuteronomy 17, beginning in verse 14, we read, "When you come to the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you possess it and dwell in it, and then say, I will set a king over me like the nations that are around me. You may indeed set a king over you, whom the Lord your God will choose. One from among your brothers you shall set as a king over you. You may not put a foreigner over you who is not your brother. Only he must not acquire many horses for himself, or cause the people to return to him. Since the Lord has said to you, you shall never return that way again. And he shall not acquire many wives for himself, lest his heart turn away, nor shall he acquire for himself excessive silver and gold. And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priest. And it shall be with him, and he shall read in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children and Israel." God, through Moses, revealed his expectation for the kings that he knew would rule over Israel. What if I told you that yes, you're going to be a king, but your first duty is to take Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy and hand copy it? Have you ever tried hand copying Scripture? There is an advantage to doing it, because if you hand copy it, you tend to remember it. But God also knew that we don't retain much of what we learn. And so he required that this king shall read in it all the days of his life. We might say something like, we want you to read it every day. Well, why did God give this command to the kings of Israel? Well, there's a dual purpose in it, and I hope you noticed it. The dual purpose, and by the way, this is not a suggestion, it is a command, that the purpose of the command is that the king may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes and doing them. The second purpose is that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to right hand or to the left. So if we look at what this is, it's that the king is to be very, very careful to observe the law. The second thing is that the king is to remain humble. He's not to think, I'm better than all of the people who are in my kingdom. And you know, and when Paul said that we should be diligent to study the Word of God and that we should rightly divide the word of truth, Moses is saying the same. They should not turn aside from the commandment either to the right or to the left. The idea is of cutting a straight path, following it exactly as it is written. And God says that the king who does this should do this so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. In other words, that king's dynasty depends on their faithfulness to the covenant of God. This series of lessons, then, will examine the various kings of Israel to determine whether they followed God's covenant command. By doing this, we're going to look at 4 areas. We're going to see what was this king's relationship with God. And then we're going to look at their decision making. And then we're going to look at the short-term effects of their reign, and then the long-term effects of their reign on Israel. Today's lesson, we will begin with the very first king of Israel, King Saul. What was Saul's relationship with God? Well, first of all, he could not even be king unless he was selected by God. In 1 Samuel 9, verse 15, we read, "Now the day before Saul came, before he came to the place where Samuel was, the Lord had revealed to Samuel, 'Tomorrow about this time I will send to you a man from the land of Benjamin, and you shall anoint him to be prince over my people Israel. He shall save my people from the hand of the Philistines, for I have seen my people, because their cry has come before me.'" What God says is he is selecting Saul to be the prince over my people Israel. And he has a purpose. His purpose is to save Israel from the hand of the Philistines. If we read the Judges, we see that the Philistines constantly harassed, constantly occupied, constantly mistreated the people of Israel. We would also learn, if we look at 1 Samuel 11, that the Ammonites are doing the very same thing to them. Israel, because of their unfaithfulness, is being picked apart, just like what God promised in Leviticus 26, just like what he promised in Deuteronomy 28 and 29. But when Saul was selected, he was searching for his father's donkey. This guy was not out doing some heroic thing. He was chasing down some lost donkeys for his father. And that actually revealed a characteristic that was important to Saul's selection. In 1 Samuel 9, verse 19 through 21, we see the character of Saul. Samuel answered Saul when Saul came to the town where Samuel was. He says, "I am the seer. Go up before me to the high place, for today you shall eat with me. And in the morning I will let you go and tell you all that is in your mind. As for your donkeys that were lost 3 days ago, do not set your mind on them, for they have been found." And then Samuel says something to Saul that catches Saul completely off guard. He says, "And for whom is all that is desirable in Israel? Is it not for you and for all your father's house?" And Saul's like, "What are you talking about?" And Saul answered, "Am I not a Benjamite from the least of the tribes of Israel? And is not my clan the humblest of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why then have you spoken to me in this way?" I think you need to know how the book of Judges ended. The book of Judges ended with the tribe of Benjamin being nearly wiped out because of sexual immorality. And so now here comes Samuel, not that many years afterwards, and he comes up and he chooses a Benjamin. God says, "I'm choosing a Benjamite from the smallest of the tribes." And Saul kind of says, and we're like the smallest clan in the smallest tribe. Why are you speaking to me this way? But God did select him. God selected him because he looked like the kings of the nations around him. He was a tall, handsome man, head and shoulders taller than the average person in Israel. But God did not leave Saul to do this on his own. God put his spirit on him. In 1 Samuel 10, verse 6, it says that the Spirit of the Lord, Samuel said to Saul, "The Spirit of the Lord will rush upon you, and you will be turned into another man." In fact, when he turned from Samuel to leave him, God gave Saul another heart. And all the signs that Samuel predicted that would come upon Saul happened that day. But God also helped Saul. When Saul was crowned king, when he was found among the baggage hiding out because he wasn't really sure at that point, God helped him out. Saul also went to his home at Gibeah, and with him went men of valor whose hearts God had touched. So God put his spirit on Saul, and God gave him men to help him in this ruling. Well, it's a good thing he did, because we learn in 1 Samuel chapter 11 that Saul was out plowing his field. And one day he comes back home, and all the people are sitting around his home, and they're crying, and like, "We just got terrible news from Jabesh Gilead. The Ammonites are going to put out the right eye of everyone in that city unless someone comes from Israel and rescues them." And when you read that account, what happens is the Spirit of God rushes upon Saul. He cuts up an ox and sends it out to all the 12 tribes of Israel and says, "You better come or this will happen to you." And they came. And they went and defeated the Ammonites so that no two Ammonites were left together. They ran away, and God gave him a great victory. This helped Saul because there were some skeptics. This guy we found in the baggage, he's going to save us? Well, after that victory, it was proven that Saul did have God on his side, and it solidified and firmly established Saul's reign over Israel. But there was something that occurred after this. Samuel called all the people together and said, "We need to re-establish the kingdom after the victory." And Samuel preached a sermon that burned the place down. And I'm going to show you how grievous that sin was, because you rejected God as your king. And he said, right now in the middle of the harvest, there's going to be severe thunderstorms. And they're coming from God. That's an absolute disaster to get the crop wet. The people were actually afraid their crops were ruined and they'd starve to death because of it, and they repented. And Samuel said, well, God has given you this king, but let me tell you, whether this kingship that you asked for will survive or not is based on your behavior and the king's behavior. In 1 Samuel 12, verses 24 through 25, it says, only fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. For consider what great things he has done for you. But if you still do wickedly, like you have been doing under the judges, you shall be swept away, both you and your king. But we could say, how has Saul's beginning been? It's been great. What's his relationship with God? It's good. God has put his Spirit on him. Samuel has carried out what God wanted him to do. And so Saul had a promising beginning. But Samuel's sermon should have rang in his ears. Because to continue the success of his reign, Saul must be faithful to the covenant. So Saul started with a good relationship with God. But how was Saul's decision making? Saul has a problem. He has a weakness. Saul fears people. He listens to what other people say. Sometimes he gets anxious about things, and he does things without talking to God. His fear of others in various situations will result in poor decision making. Turn over to 1 Samuel 13. We're going to violates the covenant because he feared the Philistines. In this account, we see that Israel faced 30,000 Philistines. And they had chariots and horsemen. They had weapons like spears and swords. And if we pay very close attention to the account, both in the Judges and have these weapons. In fact, only Saul and Jonathan actually have spear and sword, because they would have to go to the Philistines to get even their plows sharpened. And so Israel's there facing 30,000 well-armed men with no weapons. And Saul's army was afraid. Some hid in the caves. Some ran away across the Jordan River. They were like, we're toast. And Saul was told to wait 7 days for Samuel to come and offer a sacrifice before the army fought. And Saul became anxious and took matters into his own hands. In 1 Samuel 13, verse 8, we read, he waited 7 days, the time appointed by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and the people were scattering from him. I think we could read into this that what Saul expected was Samuel to show up at 6:30 a.m. on the seventh day. And when Saul got up, no Samuel. So Saul said, bring the burnt offering here to me and the peace offerings. And he offered the burnt offering. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him and greet him. You ever had that happen to you? You get impatient for the thing, and it's almost while you're doing plan B, what happens? The thing comes to pass. Well, this is not very positive for poor Saul. In 1 Samuel 13, verses 11 through 14, we see Samuel's reaction to what Saul has done. In verse 11 we read, Samuel said, what have you done? And Saul said, when I saw that the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the days appointed, and that the Philistines had mustered at Michmash, I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. And Samuel said to Saul, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the command of the Lord your God with which he commanded you. For then the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not continue. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart, and the Lord has commanded him to be prince over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. What did Saul do that's so bad? He was seeking the favor of the Lord. The problem was he assumed a prerogative that was not his. Who could offer sacrifice? Only Levites could offer sacrifice. Samuel was a Levite. Samuel could offer sacrifices, but the king of Israel of the tribe of Benjamin could not do it. In fact, if you read Leviticus carefully, if anyone from any of the other tribes approached the holy things, they were to die. And you remember the condition on whether Saul's children would inherit this kingship? And it shall be with him, and he shall read it in it all the days of his life, that he may learn to fear the Lord his God by keeping all the words of this law and these statutes, and doing them, that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers, and that he may not turn aside from the commandment either to the right hand or to the left, so that he may continue long in his kingdom, he and his children in Israel. By taking a prerogative that did not belong to him, by not being patient, now his children will not inherit the kingship. But Saul also disobeyed because he feared the people. In 1 Samuel 15, 1 through 3, we see this command to King Saul. And Samuel said to Saul, the Lord sent me to anoint you king over his people Israel. Now therefore, listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way when they came up out of Egypt. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. Is this a clear command? What does God want King Saul to do? He wants him to devote Amalek and everything in it to destruction. And this is because Amalek had attacked Israel when they were escaping Egypt. And God said, do not spare them, but kill them all. What did Saul do? In verses 7 through 9 of 1 Samuel 15, we read, and Saul defeated the Amalekites from Havilah as far as Shur, which is east of Egypt. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and devoted to destruction all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and of the oxen and of the fattened calves and the lambs, and all that was good, and would not utterly destroy them. All that was despised and worthless they devoted to destruction. And on the way home, look what Saul does. And it was told Samuel, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a monument for himself, and turned and passed on and went down to Gilgal. Now, we're not kings, so we may not completely understand everything that Saul is doing here. But Saul won a great victory. He did not kill King Agag. Why? What was customary for the kings and the nations around them is that if you won a victory over somebody else, Then you captured that king, and you had that king sit at your table. And all the kings that you defeated were to sit around your table so that every time you went to eat, you could see these monuments to your victories. You remember what God said? That you should read the law so that your heart will not be set above the people, your brothers. And then he goes and fights this battle, and on the way home, he erects a monument to himself. This man who started out humble is not humble now. What is God's reaction to this? In 1 Samuel 15, 10 through 11, it says, the word of the Lord came to Samuel. Think about this. Samuel is alone at home at night, and he hears, I regret that I made Saul king, for he has turned his back from following me and has not performed my commandments. And Samuel was angry and cried to the Lord all night. Sometimes God's spokespeople love someone. And Samuel had come to love Saul. And now Samuel's angry with God because God has rejected Saul as being king. But when Samuel comes to Saul, what does he say about what he's done? And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, blessed be you to the Lord. I have performed the commandment of the Lord. Is that true? Is that what he did? Turn to 1 Samuel 15, verse 14. 1 Samuel 15, verse 14. And Samuel said, what then is this bleating of the sheep in my ears and the lowing of the oxen that I hear? Wait a minute. Didn't Saul just say, I have performed the commandment of the Lord? And Samuel says, I don't think the evidence adds up to obedience. Why do I hear the bleating of sheep and the lowing of oxen? Saul said, They have brought them from the Amalekites, for the people spared the best of the sheep and of the oxen to sacrifice to the Lord your God, and the rest we have devoted to destruction. Then Samuel said to Saul, your version may say, be quiet. Mine says, stop. Just stop it. I will tell you what the Lord said to me this night. And he said to him, speak. And Samuel said, though you are little, or some versions say, you were little in your own eyes, and didn't I make you the head of the tribes of Israel? The Lord anointed you king over Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and said, go devote to destruction the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you pounce on the spoil and do what was evil in the sight of the Lord? You see something by that statement? Is Samuel fooled by this idea that they spared it to sacrifice it? What does he call it? The spoil. Why did you pounce on the spoil and do what was evil in the sight of the Lord? And Saul said to Samuel, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. I have gone on the mission on which the Lord sent me. I have brought Agag, the king of Amalek, and I have devoted the Amalekites to destruction. But the people took of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the best of the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal. Now what's going on here? Who's king? Saul. He finds out, he gets caught in this trap of like, you have not actually done what the Lord said to do. Why did you not do it? Well, the people, they, not me, they have done this so they could sacrifice to the Lord. And Samuel said, has the Lord his great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to listen than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and presumption is in iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. That landed. Look at what Saul says next. Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Well, that doesn't undo the judgment. Now, therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me that I may bow before the Lord. And Samuel said to Saul, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel. Saul was not a good decision maker because he did not rely on his God, but listened to people around him and let fear get the best of him so that he disobeyed God. And for his disobedience, just like was said in Deuteronomy 17, he has lost the kingdom, and his children will not inherit the throne. What did Saul's poor decision-making have? What kind of effect did it have on Israel? In the short term, Saul no longer has God's guidance or support. In 1 Samuel 16, verses 14 through 15, we read, Now the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a harmful spirit from the Lord tormented him. And Saul's servants said to him, Behold, now a harmful spirit from God is tormenting you. In the text, what we learn is that God's Spirit went to David. That God gave Saul a distressing or a harmful spirit that tormented him. Well, what did that spirit make Saul do? From this point forward, Saul becomes paranoid. And as his paranoia grows, he becomes jealous of David. His concern about maintaining the kingdom for Jonathan leads him to attempt to kill David. In fact, here's the effect on Israel. It's not just that there's this individual hatred of David, but Saul dedicates the army to hunting David down. And in doing that, what happened to Saul's mission to defeat Israel's enemies? He's not focused on what the Philistines are doing. He's not focused on what the Ammonites are doing or Moab. Now his sole purpose in life is to find David and kill him. Do you know what the irony is in this? And at this point, Saul is exactly like the kings of the nations that surround Israel. His only thing is to protect his throne. Saul became so obsessed with eliminating David that he just became worthless. In 1 Samuel 18, verses 12 through 16, we read this about Saul. Remember, this distressing spirit is on him. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. We know from other passages that he put David over the 1,000 and sent him right into the teeth of the Philistines, hoping they would do what he could not, kill him. And he went out and came in before the people, and David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. But eventually, David had to go on the run, and he went down into the southern hill country of Judah. And in the wilderness of Ziph, David and Saul confront one another. Well, actually, before that, Jonathan, Saul's son, went down to strengthen David. In 1 Samuel 23, verse 16, we read, "And Jonathan, Saul's son, rose and went to David at Horesh and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, 'Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you.' Why? Because you shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Saul my father also knows this." What does Saul know? He knows that David will be the next king. I think it says so much about Jonathan that Jonathan was fine with this. In fact, he wanted to be next to David in that kingdom and not be king. But down in the wilderness of Ziph, one night, David had the opportunity to kill Saul. And David didn't take it. In 1 Samuel 26:21, once Saul realizes how close he came to death, he said, "I have sinned. Return, my son David, for I will no more do you harm. Because my life was precious in your eyes this day. Behold, I have acted foolishly, and I have made a great mistake." Let me tell you how close he came to killing him. In the middle of the night, David walked right into the camp of Saul and walked right up over him and sat right there. And Abishai, one of the close warriors to David, saw Saul's spear. He said, "Let me pin him to the ground, for the Lord has delivered him into your hands." David says, "No, I will not raise my hand against the Lord's anointed." But David does take Saul's water jug and his spear and walks up on the mountain next to him and calls out in the middle of the night and says, "Hey, Abner, Abner, shouldn't you be guarding your king? You know, if you're not guarding your king, you should be put to death. Look what I have." And that's when Saul realizes David is not really going to harm him. Whatever happens to Saul will be from the hand of God. But remember, God's Spirit is on David. And after this event, in 1 Samuel 27, then David said in his heart, "Now I shall perish one day by the hand of Saul. There is nothing better for me than that I should escape to the land of the Philistines." Why is he going there? Well, he's going there because he's heard Saul say twice, "Oh, I won't harm you." How's that going? He leaves. Then Saul will despair. If I go to the land of the Philistines, Saul will despair of seeking me any longer within the borders of Israel, and I shall escape out of his hand. So David arose and went over, he and the 600 men who were with him, to Achish, the son of Maoch, king of Gath. And David lived with Achish at Gath, he and his men, every man with his household, and David with his 2 wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail of Carmel, Nabal's widow. And when it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, he no longer sought him. I want you to think about what's really happening to Israel at this point. Saul has been hunting David down, and David was the only one who was leading the people out into victory over the Philistines. Now where is David? How is this helping the nation of Israel that David is now with the Philistines? Well, one thing happened. Once David left, Saul stopped hunting him. But Saul's problems were not over. Now the Philistines could focus on Saul. And the Philistines want the Jezreel Valley, the best farming country in Israel. But now Saul's sin has separated him from God. In fact, in 1 Samuel 28, verse 6, when Saul knows he's got to push the Philistines out, he tries to inquire of the Lord. And what are we told? And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or by the Urim or by the prophets. So Saul sought to fix that problem. He went to Endor, to a medium, a witch, to have a seance. And he went there hoping to talk to Samuel directly. Well, God allowed that medium to call up Samuel's spirit to give Saul a message. And that message was in verses 16 through 19. And Samuel said, "Why then do you ask me?" to Saul, "since the Lord has turned from you and become your enemy." In other passages, it says, "The face of the Lord is against those who do evil. And the Lord has done to you as he spoke by me, for the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord and did not carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will give Israel also with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will give the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines." What happened? Well, there was a battle, and Israel was routed. In 1 Samuel 31, we find Saul and his sons on Mount Gilboa. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and mistreat me." But his armor-bearer would not, for he feared greatly. Therefore Saul took his own sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell upon his sword and died with him. Thus Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men on the same day together. What happened to Israel? And when the men of Israel who were on the other side of the valley and those beyond the Jordan saw that the men of Israel had fled and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned their cities and fled, and the Philistines came and lived in them. Quite literally, what happened? They took the Jezreel Valley from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. And the Philistines occupied the Jezreel Valley. Saul's sin has harmed Israel. And that's why Paul recounted in Acts 13, 21 through 22, "Then they asked for a king, and God gave them Saul, the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for 40 years. And when he had removed him, he raised up David to be their king, and testified of whom he had testified and said, I found David, the son of Jesse, David, who will do all my will." What was the long-term effect on Israel of Saul's reign? Saul's sin sowed the seeds of division in Israel. 2 more kings will rule over the United Kingdom. After that, it's divided. And it divided rather easily. Even though it was from God, people were ready for it. Why? Well, after Saul's death, the house of Judah made David king. And Abner made Saul's remaining son, Ishbosheth, king over the northern tribes. Well, what went on? It wasn't like Saul died and then all of a sudden David took the kingship. In 2 Samuel 3, verse 1, there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David. And David grew stronger and stronger while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. I want you to understand what happened here is civil war. Saul's attempt to aggrandize himself at Amalek led to civil war. Israelites killing Israelites. And the war lasted a long time. In 2 Samuel 5, verses 3 through 5, finally, after Ishbosheth's death and Abner's death, all the elders of Israel came to the king at Hebron, and King David made a covenant with them at Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. At Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months. That's how long the civil war lasted. David and Solomon would rule over a united kingdom. But after Solomon, the country willingly divided again between Judah and the northern tribes. I think we can safely say Saul was not a good king. In fact, he was terrible. What can we learn from King Saul's life? Well, you remember he was a bad decision maker because he feared people rather than God. Jesus warned us, and do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. But you remember in Leviticus 17, the kings were warned that unless they were faithful to the covenant, they would lose their throne. We are a nation of priests and kings. And what does God expect of us? Look at this from Colossians 1, 21 through 23. And you who were once alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he is now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. We, like the kings, are anointed by God. We are now priest and king. But only if indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel. It's not a guarantee that we can live any way we want and make it to heaven. It's not any guarantee that we can live any way we want and still remain a king, reigning with Jesus. So when you are tempted to sin, ask yourself, what is the impact of what I'm doing on me and on those I love? What will be the impact? We cannot predict the long-term consequences of our actions. We cannot do this for ourselves, and we cannot do this for others. But one thing I can tell you that I learned from Saul is be faithful unto death, and God will give you the crown of life. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I hope you learned something from it. It was not really an evangelistic lesson, but we do want to give anyone who knows what to do a chance to respond to God's gospel call. If you are ready and know how to obey the gospel, we invite you to do that as together we stand and sing.